Welcome to this afternoon's session on sexuality. I'm Shannon Berg, and I'm very pleased to be your host or chair for this session. We're just going to have the speakers come in their order. I'm not going to introduce them in between it all. So we have Marie Carlson coming first. She's a sexual health clinician from GF Strong. And then Bonnie O'Sullivan, who's a community developer with Generations Program in Community. And then Jude Morrison, who's Director of Resident Services and Assisted Living from Harrow Park. They'll talk 15 to 20 minutes each, and then we'll have some discussion that'll help you facilitate. So, right.
Thank you very much, and it's really an honor to be here at this significant conference and have a chance to talk about a project that's been near and dear to my heart since 2006 when we began. We've developed guidelines for supporting sexual activity for people that live in care facilities, adults, and group homes, and extending to assisted living and other areas. And we had the good fortune to be funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada, the BC Ministry of Health, and Vancouver Coastal Health. And most recently have developed a smaller, more clinically friendly document called the Sexual Health Guidelines Pocket Guide that Spinal Cord Injury BC has funded the publishing of it. And all of the access to these documents are on my last slide, and I believe they'll be uploaded to the website that people can access it. And I have cards as well. And I'm just going through a little bit of grief of one video. I can't show you it. I'll talk about it later. So this quote was from one of the authors of the guidelines, Jenny Young. I heard it in 2004. Where did we get the idea that when people cross the threshold into an institution, they must forfeit all of their rights and become less than unique human beings? And it really resonated for me then, was one of the impetuses for me to get involved in this project in 2006, which feels like a lifetime ago. And it still resonates today, and I do believe that, having all of you here in the audience shows that people are looking to improve quality of life in every aspect of care. But I do believe we have a long way to go, because people that cross that threshold still say this to us: this happens to me. I've become invisible. I've disappeared. We know that in Canada, autonomy and freedom and the idea of what our rights are is really important. And the Canadian guidelines actually look at sexual health as a major aspect of health through all ages. I always think of what we know of people that grow up in large orphanages that don't have a lot of touch, and what we know about them socially, and what happens to them in their life later socially. And then it seems we do that to our elders in some respects. And I don't mean to say that it's bad everywhere, but there's lots of room for improvement. These are some of the common issues that we get calls about from facilities, from residential care. I put a line through, not that it's a missing link, but the top three are more things that we try and stop happening. And the bottoms are things that we're trying to either find help with from healthcare professionals or from the clients that are asking questions. Definitely not an inclusive list. So where did the guidelines start? Like I say, we get calls all the time about what do we do with so-and-so who's touching somebody else? What do I do with so-and-so who's asking for help to go out on a date or have sex or something like that? So it's come from the community. And I think it's probably been said more than once that baby boomers turned 65 in 2011. That seemed like a long time ago when we started, but it's happening now. And the sexual agency and the expectations of people that are moving into facilities for what they will expect to be provided is going to change things. And I also think that the other important side of it is that the staff that need to be able to help with this need as much assistance and as much support. Now, worldwide literature search brought us to places like Israel, like on the telephone. There wasn't Skype then, I don't think. In 2006, was anyone on Skype? In Australia, the Netherlands, and the US. people were saying across the world that there isn't anything comprehensive that covers this for people with disability, people that are growing older and have limitations. So I do have a short video clip. This is from a longer film called Untold Desires, which is an Australian film. And they actually are pretty progressive. It looks a little bit bright there, but it is subtitled as well. This woman has cerebral palsy, so she's a little bit... I'm just going to... Okay, try this again. Just a couple of minutes long.
A lot of sex education and sex work, I feel, has been done for people with acquired disabilities. I don't think a lot of work has been done for people with what they call, hateful word, congenital disabilities. And if some people can't masturbate, or at least touch their body anywhere, it must be horrific when so many people in this society are free to exercise so many options. I mean, the options are there if you're brave enough to take them. Not everybody's people with disabilities are often limited in their options because nobody allows them to take risks. Even with their own bodies, they're not allowed to take so-called risks.
I included that one because we are talking about the ability to take risks, and I think it's been mentioned a few times, and the right to take risk and how that can be supported. So the issues we wanted to address when we were talking about the guidelines, and there were focus groups from across BC looking at what needed to be in there. We really wanted to make sure that there was ethical expert base, the law, as well as the clinical base. And there was there's Vancouver, Bethan Everett and Jenny Young were the ethicists that were involved in the project, and Jarrett Clements, a lawyer, who did a lot of the Riverview psychiatric facility policy in the 80s. As well as a lot of our team, myself and Sally Breen and Kate McBride, who wanted to be here but couldn't today. And Dr. Stacey Elliott is the sexual medicine physician that is just down here to the right, that is here as well, and she is a very valuable part of our team. So these areas are that we wanted to make sure were in there as part of it, and I'm going to go through some of them along the way. But perspectives of values and beliefs. I think of residential care, and I'm going to give you a glimpse of some of the feelings that are involved in this. I always think of a microcosm of Vancouver put into four walls, and having everyone to be expected to get along and support each other, and kind of make things work. And it's hard to believe that we manage anything sometimes, because there are so many differences of opinions in generations, in culture, in religious backgrounds, and just general attitudes to life. And the visual on the right at the bottom of the beds came to mind from a couple that I worked with, where they wanted to room together. And the next bit is what people usually go to. We don't think of holding hands or kissing. We think, okay, people are going to go to the most extreme, unsafe thing that could possibly happen. That's going to get everyone in trouble. And the couple, it was just a few years ago in the Lower Mainland, and they had wanted to room together, and they would like to have laid it beside in their beds together. And that visual with the side rails between does happen to people. That, sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. It's just something that does happen for people's, our peace of mind as healthcare professionals. But this couple had a year and a half of barriers to move in together, because the staff had a discomfort around the fact that even though they were heterosexual, they weren't legally married. And you might think, well, okay, what does that mean now? It was only a few years ago. The outcome that was significant for me is the staff got told in by the management, with their thoughts they were doing the right thing, that it's like 2008. You're going to have to get over this if this is your problem. And if you can imagine what happened to a group of staff that had discomfort and were told that they didn't have a voice, that the demoralization of the staff by the time we were asked on board, and the barriers that they put up around safety that could have been more easily dealt with, definitely made a difference. So even though the sexuality of the client is paramount and their quality of life and rights, the other people involved, the family and the organization and the staff are just as vitally important. This is just something to keep in mind of a case that's in our shorter pocket guide. They might be a couple that you might recognize, Sid and Jean, living in your facility, and they have different levels of capability. Sid is a little bit better off with his mild dementia than Jean is with their moderate Alzheimer's, and some experts in the crowd might be able to define what they would look like. And people are presuming that they're getting together somehow in Sid's room, and he's been seen undressing her. So just some questions to keep in your mind, and just for some food for thought. Should we allow this potential sexual relationship? We don't know for sure, but people are presuming. And how do we assess capability? Questions that we try to answer for healthcare professionals in our guidelines. Who gets to decide and when to intervene? There's 3 slides that talk about the capability question. If somebody is capable, they can make their own decisions, and it's proposed in the guidelines that even if someone's capable, if they're living in your facility, you have a duty of care to provide them with information around safety, whether it be safer sex or physical safety. But they can tell you that they'll take your information or not. But there are 3 different areas that look at the criteria to decide what to do if someone's not. And this isn't meant to prohibit sexual activity. It's only meant to a stopgap to assess and to see how risk can be minimized. And we look at who decides. There isn't a BC law that covers sexual activity, and anyone that has a representation agreement, I'm wondering if anyone in the crowd has someone can decide about my sexual activity in their rep agreement. Because if you don't, you're not covered. So even though legally you're not covered, we know that the facility and family have to make a decision. And we talk in the guidelines of the proposal of it being a negotiated decision. The family knows, and whoever makes the usual healthcare decisions for someone is the one who would be stepping up to the plate for that. And these conditions for intervening, to ask yourself these questions, whether it's effective. And there's it goes into detail as far as examples in the guidelines and what that might mean. The 4th one, it being not discriminatory. If you're actually going to limit somebody's freedom sexually, it is discriminatory in Canada to stop someone from being able to have legal sex in their own privacy of their own home, and facilities are a person's home. So with that in kind of as the umbrella concept place to start. Doesn't mean that it's a simple question, but that's kind of the ethics and the law. So this is the film that I can't show you, but this Ruth and George are so sweet, and it's from a longer film that if anyone is working in facilities, I'd recommend purchasing it. We have the information for that. It's called the Hebrew Home for the Aged. What's the time though? Dementia, freedom of sexual expression, and it looks at family attitudes and staff attitudes. So I didn't get how much time I have left. How much time do I have left? Okay. The last and kind of most controversial aspect that we wanted to include on the guidelines is, what if someone wants help? What if somebody needs help and needs help with sexual activity or other aspects? And there were 3 categories that we get the most questions about and are actually the most either controversial or can be problematic. So we wanted to address them instead of the calls that we usually get where we say, this is what you should do. It's not in writing anywhere, but this is what you should do, and this is what we know about standards of practice. And as I go through them, I'm not going to say that this is going to be easy for anyone. We're looking at the ideal of what we know in BC, because it only covers BC laws for now. There's the hope to have it be across Canada, but that this is what is okay to do in our law and in ethics and clinical. The idea of how that happens, of course, the staff are going to need support and education and looking at the professionalism and clarifying your role. But we do say that it's appropriate to help with preparation and to help with cleanup, but not participate in the sexual activity or be present. And you'd be surprised what happens when people don't have any guidelines. People that go on either end of the extreme that you can imagine. We can say legally, because we had that clarified, that it's legal to obtain explicit materials, magazines, videos, or sex toys for someone. But if, in this case, the recommendation would be if the client can do it themselves, like in any case, that's recommended because of the boundary possibilities. And lastly, the assistance in obtaining an escort. We looked at a few aspects of that, one being that in Canada, the criminalization aspect of it is around the solicitation. So we can't say without a shadow of a doubt that if someone makes a call for someone who can't make their own call, say someone who's, examples are someone who's blind and can't speak and wants to call an escort or a sex worker, that we can't say without a shadow of a doubt that a healthcare professional wouldn't be charged. Not likely, but we can't say it, so we're recommending and proposing in the guidelines that we don't do that. But it's not illegal to have a sex worker in your facility, and it wouldn't be able to make you charged as a common body house because sex itself is legal between two consenting adults. And on this line, I'm hoping this encourages you to read them, to take a look. I'd start with the pocket guide because it's shorter, it's only 13 pages and quite enticing. The other one's 60. But it has the law, for the managers and the facility owners that need that. And I'm going to end with a 2-minute video clip from the Scarlet Road documentary from Australia. Once again, it came to our DOXA Documentary Film Festival in 2012, and the Spinal Cord Injury BC sponsored a screening in May, and we had the star of the show here in person for the screening. And it's about sex work in Australia, where in New South Wales it's decriminalised, and a group called Touching Base has brought sex workers and people with disability together as two discriminated against groups who are looking to increase their social power to make change in the area. It just happens to be about sex work, but it gives me shivers thinking about how much humanity is in this. And it was also shown on Passionate Eye. You might be able to find it online, and I should have been opening it while I talked. My apologies.
I do not have a girlfriend, so I cannot share my feelings with just one person. Rachel makes me feel like I have a girlfriend.
I like the fact that my job always entails pleasure, making someone feel better about themselves. They deserve to smile.
It's hard because with your other kids you don't have anything to do with their sex lives. Mark needed that little bit of help.
Rachel sees them as people, but she sees them as people that want to explore themselves to the fullest.
Yes, you have good muscles.
I would like him to lose his virginity.
Oh, I cannot wait.
It's completely legal for a sex worker to come here. You can order in like a pizza.
People with disability want connection, intimacy and touch.
What am I going to do with you tonight?
People don't want to talk to me about sex. They just want to know where they can get it.
Tonight's really important. I haven't got much movement below the knee. To be able to achieve normal sexual function when you think yourself incapable of it, makes me feel like a real bloke again.
These are people that very often has, for a long time, never been touched.
Everybody needs to have somebody to hold hands with.
Sexuality and sexual expression is the last bastion.
It has been my dream to have a woman stay in my bed overnight.
Everyone has a right to sexual expression, and that includes people with disability.
So we know that sexually transmitted infections are increasing in the elder population. People are accessing sex work. That's not the only reason why people get sexually transmitted infections. But if we don't start the conversation about what people need and what they're wanting to access, as I've said, I think we're doing them a great disservice. And I'm going to end there and pass it on. That's the list that you'll be able to see with everything else and our thank yous. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm grateful that I got to start with that theme music. My name is Bonnie O'Sullivan, and I work with Community. I oversee the Generations project there. The Generations project, the Generations program, is a program that works with lesbian, gay, trans, bisexual, and queer older adults. We say that's approximately 5.79% of the population, which means that about 1 in 20 people identify as part of one of those communities. Generations offers outreach, advocacy, workshops and training in queer and trans competency for senior service providers, information and referral, social support groups, as well as programs and events. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of language that I'm going to be using today, just for clarification so you know what words I'm using and the context that I'm using them in. For the purpose of today's presentation, when I use the word queer, I'm talking about sexual orientation only. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, asexual, ambisexual, pansexual, and polysexual. If I'm talking about trans communities, I'm going to identify them separately. And we'll use trans, which means transgender, transsexual, genderqueer, and non-binary trans. And the reason that we do that is because sexual orientation and gender identity are two very separate issues. They have different needs, challenges, and that kind of thing. So we like to make sure that we're not throwing them all under the same umbrella. So there's kind of a list of key dates for LGBTQ people here, and I'll let you take a look at them. But I'm just going to reference one of the dates on this list. In 1986, the American Psychological Association removed homosexuality from its list of mental illness. So what that means is that someone who's 80 years old now was 53 when that happened. So one of the key issues I'm going to be talking about today is recloseting and care. And I think it's really important to put in context what these people's life experiences are. And if you're 53 years old, every time you go to the doctor, your sexual orientation and sexual expression is pathologized, then you're going to have a different relationship with the healthcare system. We've just started a project called the Aging Out Project, and this project is going to look at inclusion and belonging for LGBTQ seniors in BC's healthcare system. It's funded by Vancouver Foundation, and the project has 3 different stages. We're just completing the first stage, which is a series of focus groups with LGBTQ seniors, as well as staff and managers in residential care and assisted living. We're going to use all the information that we collect from those focus groups to create a curriculum for workshops, which we're going to do throughout Vancouver Coastal and Fraser Health. There's going to be 20 in total that are going to happen in just over a year. And once we've completed those workshops, then we're going to move on. We're going to hold 2 policy dialogue sessions with LGBTQ seniors and service providers and come up with some policy recommendations after that. So I have a list of the partners that we're working with for this initiative. I'd like to point to the last one on the list because the whole name's not there. So I want to make sure I recognize them. So it's Plum Living Home Healthcare is at the bottom. But what we've tried to do is work with the 2 health authorities whose geographic catchment we're going to be working in for the duration of the project, and also include the healthcare unions, as well as Harrow Park Centre, Jude. So like I said, we've conducted 3 focus groups thus far with LGBTQ seniors. In total, for the 3 focus groups, we had 25 participants, and the participants were from diverse communities. So we had trans included, as well as lesbian, gay, asexual, polysexual, and heterosexual people. The heterosexual people that were involved in the project were supporting LGBTQ elders in care. So they were part of families of choice. Also, you can be trans and heterosexual at the same time. So that is included in those numbers, which is why you'll see it doesn't add up, because you can be in multiple categories. The age range that we looked at for the focus group was 43 to 81. The 43-year-old that was included because they were currently in a residential care facility, and we wanted to get as much information as we could from people who were in facilities. The remaining participants we had were from 40 to 59, 5 participants, from 60 to 69, 9 participants, and finally from 70 to 81, we had 12 participants. Out of those, 4 were in residential care facilities and 15 were in families of choice, supporting people in residential care facilities. So the very first question, to clarify, for the focus groups, it was randomized, the people that were included. So it was all different age range and sexual orientation and gender identities involved in each of the 3 focus groups. And the first question that we asked people was, how did they want to be referred to? So as a group, what word could we use to describe their sexual orientation and gender identity? And what was interesting is that all 3 groups had different ideas of what was okay and what was not okay in terms of describing them. The first group didn't want us to use words at all, really. I mean, they didn't want us to call them queer. They didn't want us to call them LGBTQ. What they wanted is to call them us or our community. The second group asked to be referred to exclusively as queer. And there were trans people in that group who wanted to be included under the queer umbrella as well. And lastly, we had a group that wanted to be LGTB and identified that they found the word queer offensive and that they didn't want the Q used, and that they also didn't want to be identified as queer, individually or collectively. One of the key questions we asked to all 3 groups was, how has being an LGBTQ person impacted your aging process specifically? And the most common response that we got was the challenge of dealing with intersecting oppressions. So what does it look like to deal with non-normative gender expression, as well as sexual orientation, various ethnocultural backgrounds, ableism, socioeconomic status, and finally, on top of all of those other oppressions, dealing with what comes with aging and what that looks like. They also identified that there were no queer-specific services in healthcare. And that's something I find a lot in my work. People often come in and ask for a list of, queer programs, or even doctors who are queer identified themselves, or dentists, and we can't always provide those kinds of things because people don't tell us, right? So they also talked about increased isolation that came with separation from their biological families. So a lot of them had become estranged from their biological families, and as a result, they were aging in isolation and feeling sort of alienated as well, sometimes even from the queer community, because they couldn't participate in the kinds of activities that they could in their youth. So, jock culture, bar culture, or any of these different things. They also spoke of caretaking fatigue. So most of them, like I said, had created these really extensive families of choice with friends and in the queer community. And what was happening was that these massive families of choice were aging collectively together. So you had older people who were also trying to take care of older people, and they were experiencing health issues while having huge amounts of caregiving responsibilities because of these extensive networks. They also talked about caretaking fatigue because quite a few of them who weren't estranged from their biological families, were given all the responsibility of caretaking for elderly parents because they weren't quote-unquote married. So their relationships weren't recognized. Their parents therefore saw them as single, unattached, and not having families of their own. And as a result, all of the caretaking responsibilities fell to them. And the last thing that they talked about was something really positive. It was the fact that they felt like they had increased resilience and coping mechanisms because of a lifetime of discrimination. So they felt that they were stronger and they had these really powerful tools that they could engage in their own aging process. And they felt equipped to deal with discrimination and the challenge of aging because they'd always had to stand out as individuals who didn't feel like they fit in or were understood in the greater community. So they were binding together with age and using those tools. The very last question we asked in the focus groups was, if you had 5 minutes with the director of residential care director of care in a residential care facility, what would you say? And the first answer that came up across the board in all three groups was increased management staff education on LGBTQ issues. Each group identified that they wanted the emphasis to be on management as opposed to staff. They all believed that the way to affect real and meaningful change was to have it come from the top down. The second question that came up, quite a few people asked, and basically it was a gauge for the safety of the facility. So they asked, how many queer people are in your facility? And the reason they asked that question is because that's how they were going to gauge the safety and inclusion of the facility. If the answer to that question is none, it's not a safe space for a queer person, and they don't want to be there. That was the result from the focus group, because it meant people weren't coming out in care, and obviously there are LGBTQ people, so it meant that it wasn't an inclusive and belonging and welcoming space to be. They asked the director of care to recruit and hire LGBTQ staff and encourage them to come out at work. I think it's a challenging request. People need to come out on their own time and when they're safe. But as I pointed to earlier, a lot of the people that we're talking about in this age cohort have dealt with a lifetime of systemic discrimination, and they're cautious of even the most welcoming ally. So they wanted their own people to support them. Lastly, they asked to include a diversity statement in the mission, vision, and values, as well as patient handbook. Okay, thanks. So that was it for the focus groups for LGBTQ seniors. We have a lot more information I'm happy to share with anyone who will listen to me. But we also did interviews with management and staff in residential care facilities. So we're actually still in the process of doing this. We haven't completed it yet, and we have quite a few more interviews to do. But I'm just going to point to a couple of the broad themes that have emerged thus far. So the first one is just an emphasis on the importance of education. Participants expressed that they hadn't received any LGBTQ-specific training in their facility, and that they had training with other cultural groups, specifically ethnocultural groups, and sensitivity training for them. They also talked about the overall failure to recognize seniors as sexual beings and how challenging that can be when you're talking about a population who's marginalized and separated because of their sexual orientation and sexual expression. And lastly, they talked about competing demands in healthcare in terms of resources and time. So I'm just going to wrap up with some suggestion for best practices. The workshops that the Aging Out Project is going to be doing is going to list a lot of best practices and provide some really concrete tools that people can move forward with. For the time being, I'm just going to list a handful here. So, firstly, community provides training in queer and trans competency, and I'd encourage any of you to contact us, and we'd be more than happy to partner with you and support you in creating more inclusive and belonging spaces, welcoming spaces. Second, start an LGBT committee in your facility and listen to what they have to say. As I sort of mentioned in the beginning, we had 3 focus groups, and all 3 wanted us to use different words around their sexual orientation. So, it's a diverse group. There's no static set of needs and attributes. And in order to really engage them and honor them and respect them in this process, you need to include them in the process. And that means talking to them one-on-one in your facilities and providing a space where they can come and say, listen, you can do this for me, and it'll make me feel safe. Also include LGBTQ diversity statement in your residents and clients, right? Mission, vision, and value statements. It sets the tone for everybody who walks into a residential care assisted living facility, and it makes the LGBTQ people who are in your facility feel safe and protected. Also display written graphic materials, images, artwork, and signage welcoming LGBTQ people into your facility. So for that one, I know a lot of people come into my office and say that the way that they determine what residential care assisted living facility they want to be in is by walking into the library and finding out if there's any LGBTQ books or movies. And if there are, then they know you've considered them. And as a result, it's much more likely that it's going to be a welcoming space. And lastly, create strategic partnerships with queer and trans organizations. The culture, the language, all of that is changing all the time, and we're here to support you in any way that we can. Thank you for your time.
Hello, I'm Jude from Harrow Park. And as I said this morning, I've only been there for 15 months, so I also rely heavily on the experiences of the people who work there and the people who live there. I have maybe 3 slides, and then I've got a video, and so I'll introduce the video. The first thing I do need to acknowledge is my 2 co-presenters. I love the pocketbook. I love the pocketbook, and I love the larger guide, so I would recommend it highly to any of you as an amazing resource. So it just came out before, it just came out before this talk, and I reviewed it, and I went, oh my God, this is so good. So well done. And I cannot speak highly enough of community and the support and partnerships they provide. We've had them in a couple of times to do some education with our staff. And in addition, they're on our committee. We have a committee at Harrow Park, and I'll show you a little bit about that. So I was struggling to come up with a glitzy title, and that's the best I could do. So I'll skip that. So just a quick view of Harrow Park. It's no accident, I think, that Harrow Park has been active on these issues well before I got there because of where we're physically situated. I did go to a conference at McGill in October last year, and that there's a similar facility, Fudger House, in Toronto that's right in the gay district and is supported by 511 Centre in the same way that there's a partnership between community and Harrow Park. And in Montreal, there's a similar movement happening. So, interestingly, just to kind of give you a bit of context across Canada, I think the time is now. These issues are being recognized now in terms of the need for safety for the gay, lesbian, queer community, trans community in housing, in residential care. And it's very interesting to see different facilities popping up. In fact, Bonnie and I are both involved in a committee right now to look at a facility that would be just for LGBTQ residents. So that's coming down the pipe. And if you're interested in going to a focus group on that, Bonnie and I can help you find the right place in June. One of which will be at Harrow Park. There's the plug. So what is Harrow Park? We are a campus of care. We have 154 residents in private rooms. We have an assisted living with a capacity of 30, but currently we're at 28 residents in private one-room or bachelor-style apartments. And we have an independent housing, which is on top of the tower, with 38 tenants in a strictly rental situation. Just a little bit of background in terms of the board and staff and who we are. The very cool thing, I used to work for the Nurses Union. We used to call it the lesbian spaceship. And Harrow Park is kind of like the gay, lesbian, sort of queer spaceship, which is an amazing thing. A lot of times you talk a lot about not only the residents who live there, but the staff who work there. And there are a lot of staff who are out at Harrow Park in terms of their own identity, which I think creates a norm and a social sense of acceptance. And of course, of all diversity, not just of the queer community, but you look around in Vancouver, and I would say Harrow Park is very representative of all of the diversity that exists in our society, which is what makes it so great. Okay, so I don't have any more of that to present, but I do want to just show you. We did create, one of the first things that we created when I started there was a committee, an LGBTQ committee. And funny enough, it's become quite a hot little committee because, first of all, there were a number of people who were really pissed off that they didn't get invited to be on the committee. So that's, that was very exciting. Now, this is huge in terms of, it's 2 pages long. The hilarious thing, if you look at the definitions, we debated for at least 3 meetings what we were going to call ourselves, and Bonnie can attest to this. And we finally, we had a huge, long alphabet soup, as I like to call it, and finally we settled on QT, which we thought was kind of cute. And so we have had this committee since probably about September of last year. And the committee is comprised, most importantly, this will be in the materials, but most importantly, it has representation from the executive team, i.e. the leadership of the organization, and a commitment from the organization leadership. And really, we're open to anybody who wants to be on the committee, so everybody can join. But at least 2 from the care, 2 residents from the care side, which we have succeeded in, both of whom are identifying as gay or lesbian. At least 1 resident, but we have 2 from assisted living. We don't currently have anybody from independent housing. We do have family and friend representatives, and we have members from the community or affiliated groups, community being one of them. We have representatives from staff, 2 from the care department, 1 from our leisure department, 1 from social services, and 1 from our dietary department. And so that, I think, was a really great step for us in terms of creating a mechanism to have that conversation. And at first we met very quietly up in the penthouse, far away from everything, and very quickly our next meeting is going to be down in our library, where we are readily accessible to everybody because everybody wants to be involved. So it's really quite an amazing journey that we're on. So that's just a quickie on that. And the last thing I did was, a lot of times you come to these places, you look around, and it's all of us. And it's not, I'm happy to see that there are some people who are older, who are here at the conference. I'm not there yet. And so I felt it would be disingenuous not to have the voices of our elders here. So I did work with 2 students and a professor at Kwantlen in the journalism school, and they did this amazing video, which was really quite cathartic. It was great as a leader to work with them in terms of hearing firsthand what the residents were saying, and we didn't just interview the gay residents. We've interviewed and included heterosexual residents about sex and intimacy, in keeping with this theme. And but also to hear what the staff had to say. And so that really opened my eyes in terms of where we need to go. So just in terms of a little introduction, I know you're all fixated on what I'm doing here. Let me find... Ooh, no, don't do that. No, I think I just did something bad. Cancel, just cancel. Cancel, thank you. I told you it's bad. Okay. I'm not sure where my thing is. Yeah, okay. No, I keep losing it. But I'll introduce it and then I'll find it. So in it, there's 4 or 5 different little vignettes. One is Glenn, who does identify as gay, and you'll hear from him directly. And the comments I just want to make about that is, when people are coming into residential care, I think it's really important to ask open-ended questions in terms of people's identity and how they want to be identified. So things like who are your family, who are your friends in terms of trusting, caring relationships, which opens the door for people to talk about same-sex relationships and to self-identify. How would you like to be, what name would you like to use? Because, when I was working at the union, we had a story where somebody who was transgender went to the emergency department and the staff kept referring to her by his legal name, right? And it was complete lack of recognition of that person's identity and who they were as a person in this world. So not only were they needing emergency services, but they were not getting them in a way that was appropriate to who they were. Looking at things like having dedicated rooms or a way for people to have intimacy that is supportive and private. Next, you'll meet Philippa and Jack. And Philippa and Jack met at Harrow Park, and they both lived in assisted living. And then Philippa's health declined, and she had to move over to our care side. So we set up an agreement with them, which they're not 100% happy with, but that allows Philippa to go, sign out whenever she wants to, and go and sleep over at Jack's place. So we had to do a bit of a risk assessment in terms of falls and what to do when somebody falls down and all of that stuff. And then next you'll meet Elaine and Rick. Elaine lives on our special care unit, has quite advanced dementia, and they're looking at just notions of intimacy between family members. We have had experiences at Harrow Park about non-consensual relationships and what to do about that, which are really, really challenging, but you have to deal with them. And so I think using the guide is really helpful. People can express themselves when they have dementia, and they can make it pretty darn clear when no means no. And so we had to intervene in a couple of cases where that wasn't being respected. And it was quite... The sad part of that is the trauma that person experiences both in the moment and then, of course, the trauma that comes afterwards. And our staff commented about, trying to provide personal care to that person. They were so traumatized that they didn't want to receive any care. So how important it is to recognize our histories, both, from before, whether we've experienced abuse, but also if abuse does occur within the facility. And then you'll meet some staff who have worked there for several years. Some of the comments that didn't make it into the video was they did provide care on the special care unit to somebody who was intersex or hermaphrodite, who in her earlier years, her gender had been picked by, or sex had been picked by her parents or doctor as male. And so the trauma that that woman had to relive as her dementia started to progress. And you can imagine with dementia, you start to go back to your earlier years, and she was living through that trauma again. And for our staff, how to work through that with her and to be sensitive to that. And finally, one thing I always like to do when we have students coming through is I stand at the front door of Harrow Park, and I did this with a bunch of LPNs. And I said, okay, so it's your first day at Harrow Park, and you're full-on LPN, and you go into the first room, and you realize the person there is transgendered. What do you do? And then all these little baby LPNs look at you with these big, big eyes. But boy, does that ever open up a great conversation like we're doing today. And people are so appreciative because they're hungry for that information. We live in a society now that I think is open and can be more open. And so I think we just have to enter into the conversation and invite people in, which is why a committee is so great. So if you'll bear with me for just a minute, I just have to find my...
Friendship requires trust. Trust and intimacy have a lot to do with each other. I've made friends that I trust. When we speak intimately. I know that there are people here who talk to me about things they don't talk to anybody else about. And there are certainly people here to whom I speak about things that I don't talk to everybody about. Those are people with whom I managed to establish some level of intimacy. Goethe, the great German poet, had a beautiful definition of intimacy. He said that intimacy is that place wherein I am the guardian of your solitude. It's the place where you completely respect the other person. And with that comes trust and eventually intimacy. I think there is a fair amount of suicide among elders. Cause loneliness, I would say. Loneliness is such a difficult thing to deal with. As I discovered after I broke up with my partner, it's like pain. It causes emotional pain. And I think probably for a lot of people, physical pain as well. I think a lot of sickness is based on loneliness or neglect in one's life. I don't think anything changes without commitment. I just think that things require time to develop. And quite frankly, I haven't been attracted to anybody so far. That's not quite true. I was attracted to somebody so far, but was rejected. Boo-hoo. There may be people here who passionately love me. There may not be, I don't know. A couple of years ago I broke up with somebody I'd been with for 10 years. And that was difficult. It's amazing how much pain we can take, physical or emotional. I've discovered the parameters of both in the past year.
It's very nice to have company to do things. We do a lot of stuff together, and that's nice. It's important to have somebody together with, have friends. It's not easy. It's pretty hard to have a relationship in such a confined situation. I have to, if I'm going to stay with John, which I'm allowed to do, I have to sign out, and somebody has to come and check on me at God knows what time in the morning, you know. It's very strange sometimes to have somebody walk in and see, "Are you okay?" "Yes, we're fine, thank you. We're trying to sleep before you came along." It's an important part of your life to have relationships with people. It should happen here too, where possible.
Hold each other's hand and give each other a good night kiss when we part at night. And I think we're very fortunate because how many other residents wish to have a relationship? So whatever that is, whatever involved in this relationship, how many people are mentally and let's say physically capable of going out and doing things like we do? There's not very many. When it's on the outside, if you're in a relationship, you were by yourself part of the time, and with the other person, the other part, most of you were separated. You were alone more. Whereas here, it's almost as if we were married. It's very, very nice to have somebody put your arms around at night. And there's a feeling when we're together alone that's different than this. I can't put it into words. I don't think anybody could, but there's just a different feeling.
She was heavily medicated when she came here. Quite angry, hitting people. And, you know, there was, at that time, more downs than there was ups. I just started a daily journal, and I write down just things that happen when I come here. I think I've got a pretty good rapport with most of the people here. Rick Ekman, this is my wife Elaine. Is that right, hon? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kind of bet.
Whether she knows me or not, I don't know. Just the way it is. And we've had lots of ups and downs over the last 2 years. And lately it's been pretty good. It's in a pretty good space right now.
Yeah.
Give me a kiss. There we go. I'll just keep coming.
Mm-hmm.
It's just coming down to see her and hold your hand, right?
Yeah.
That's all I need. Mm-hmm. Just hold her hand, touch her. I think that's all she needs right now. Elaine graduated from Emily Carr, painter, sculptor. I retired at 55 and we started traveling. So we had 12 really good years, retirement. Just love Elaine, that's all. You want to hear some rock and roll?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, let's play some rock. Give me a hand.
Yeah.
Okay. And dance?
Yeah.
That's a girl. There we go. How's that? That's pretty good?
Good.
Are you tired?
Yeah, I'm choosing to.
You want to sit down? That's all we can ask for.
Yeah.
Yep. that good?
Yeah.
There we are. I come every day and
Oh, yeah.
just to be with her, and that's it.
The personality of Hero Park, I think, mirrors the society. So when we talk about stuff like sex and intimacy, in the first at least 10 years of working here, nobody even knew anybody had any up there.
Intimacy is between two souls and the enjoyment of one's body. Regardless of sexual orientation or sexual differences, we've taken quite a good step here on that road to developing an environment where residents who do want to be intimate with each other don't feel threatened or shut out from that part of their life that they still wish to experience before they pass.
I don't think you'll see a lot of sex happening I think happens. You know, there's definitely have been people who have had sex here, no question. It's more about intimacy. That's my belief. And when the sex does happen, let's make sure that we create a space for that.
Okay, thanks to all of you. Really great presentations from all three of you. So now we'll open up the mics for questions if you want to. Questions or comments or discussion. Dibs, I got here first.
Ooh. I just wanted to, I'm Miriam Larson again, gerontologist. Wanted to make sure people know that in Barb's here. New Westminster, I guess a couple years ago now, at Century House started a gay-straight alliance. And watching that process was tremendous, and watching it bridge with the gay-straight alliance at the high school was also tremendous. So it's wonderful there. I wanted to share something comic and then just ask, I think, Bonnie. So I'll ask my question, then I'll leave my comment. Do you have an opinion as to why your three focus groups self-identified so differently? Was it geography, demographics, that kind of thing? So I'll leave that. And I will note that our 23 and 27-year-old daughters are still uncomfortable with the idea of their parents having sex.
So I think part of the reason that there was a change in the kind of words that they wanted to be identified by is around politics. So one of the focus groups that wanted to be identified as queer were a more political group. They were more sort of engaged in systemic advocacy, and I think they'd sort of become acclimatized to the word queer through their political work over the last few years. And the other two groups, neither of them wanted that word used. It's kind of been a bit of a take-back word, so a word that's been used sort of against the community, that the community has reappropriated. And not everybody has caught up because it's been used against that age demographic for a lot of years. So I think it's about politics. The other two groups weren't as political as the first one. And the first group didn't want to use the alphabet, as Jude calls it, because it was just laborious. So they didn't want to have to list every single letter, and sometimes it can be challenging because we forget some of the letters and then we're not including everybody in it. So I think that's what that was about.
Just for the panel who didn't meet me this morning, my voice is still hoarse. Doug Johnson from Fraser View. I'm on the auxiliary. As a gay person, I think the big change in the medical field happened when the AIDS epidemic hit the community. I saw a dramatic change from the beginning because a friend of mine was one of the early victims of AIDS, where he was absolutely shunned by different institutions when he needed to have immediate help. And it was very traumatizing to him. Now, that was back in 1986. So fast forward to today's world, what I'm seeing in the health field is a complete understanding, recognition of gay people and their spouses. Now, my spouse and myself been together for over 34 years. So we've seen that transition. The one thing that we are concerned with is where are we going in our old age? And you've been bringing that right out of the closet to say. It's a topic that I'm glad to hear is being discussed today and not 15 years from now when I go into a facility. The thing about the gay community is our culture is different. Our attitude towards sexuality is different, whether it be a gay man or a gay woman or a transgendered. Our attitudes are different. And it's going to be, what are you as health providers going to do when I get there and now I have a different type of sexuality? And I expect, even though I'm going to be 15 years older, I'm going to have a sexuality. So I applaud you for bringing that forward. This topic was one of the main reasons I came to this conference, and I've enjoyed the whole day. So thank you for ending the day on this very, if I can put it in quotes, taboo topic, because sexuality is still very taboo. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just make a comment on that. It's interesting because, of course, one of the biggest things, and we saw it this morning being discussed, that people confront when they're going to residential care, and I would add assisted living to that, or even just getting old, is loneliness. There's a real lack of connection, I think, with the community, our various different communities, but that's felt even more acutely, I think, if you identify as at all different, in whatever that word looks like. But I think in the context of this conversation, it would probably be sort of the queer trans community, because people are going back into the closet. You hear about care providers just saying, well, we treat everybody the same, and we're not all the same. And so you actually have to go beyond treating people as the same. And I think that we as providers have to link very deeply with the community and with volunteers and with families, whatever that looks like, to make sure that that linkage is there, because there's a whole lot of really lonely people.
Hi, my name's Sandra, and I'm from Smithers, BC, and we're a remote and rural community in northern BC. And the main reason I'm here is actually about the taboo topics in residential care, but I have a role in community as well. And I have a fair amount of sort of nursing background in sexuality. I have certified practice. But when I was in the community looking at the health and wellness of elders, I have been quite shocked, actually, and ask you where the best place to get sexual health resources for elderly people is. And I automatically thought it would be options for sexual health or the Vancouver Health Department, but their resources, they had none. And they actually referred me to Calgary to get resources for our elderly people around sexual health. So perhaps you've got some resources, but it is a huge issue for the community people that are over 65 and aging into healthy sexuality. So
I'm quite surprised that options wasn't an option, because I know that the last executive director, that was one of his, Greg Smith, that was one of the things that was a focus for him, is looking at seniors and seniors living and opening the door for more conversation. So I can't say I would go back to them, but that does really surprise me that they weren't open to that. I can mention a really great film called Still Doing It. I know that doesn't give sexual health information, but it's a really great film on women over 65 that just came to mind as you were talking. What would be? As far as other organized situations, as far as sexual health, I can't say I can. I'm going to have to do some homework because I would have sent you to options as well, for the reasons I've just said. I don't know if anyone else has.
Sounds like an area where even provincially, people could come together and pull the resources that are there together. And it looks like we have a great group starting here, and you can join these group at the table at the front and probably create us a great guide.
And I guess if you're looking online, if you just like the Canadian sexual health guidelines, Alberta has a good program on sex education as well, called the Alberta Society for Promotion of Sexual Health. But how many seniors, depending on their age and their interest, would be are that comfortable with that option or are going to be seeking that out? I know that's going to be changing soon enough, but it's definitely not the case now.
I think what will happen, though, is that as whoever mentioned the 2011 year for baby boomers, that was you. So the kids of baby boomers, as they hit, because it's not only when your kids are 23 and 25. None of us will ever admit that our parents ever had sex. So.
Yeah.
That's just icky.
And I guess last thought, if you could give me your name, I'd like to put you in touch with the Vancouver Options folks that are kind of the directors of the province that could try and put you in touch with somebody.
Well, they did put me in touch with Calgary.
Calgary. Okay.
So it sounds like it's an area that needs some work. Yeah. Are there any other comments or questions for the panel? Just give you a minute if you want to get to the mic.
Can I add something to Jude's comment about the loneliness? Something I didn't get a chance to mention, and since many of you are out there working there, the idea of, I've heard about the 3 hazards of institutional living: loneliness, boredom, and helplessness. And when I talked about sexual behavior and things that look inappropriate, like touching somebody or making rude comments, I would just like to encourage you in the back of your mind to always think first of those hazards before you think that they're really about sex. Because we know that people that are lonely and bored do all sorts of things that they wouldn't do when they don't know how to communicate that. And if the social and the other intimacy besides sexual intimacy is attended to, they often aren't doing the socially inappropriate things. So not to jump to the conclusion that they're being perverted or wanting sex from somebody that doesn't make sense.
So thank you for that, the great presentations from all 3 of you that really complement each other. And it's really, really clear that because it's a taboo topic, good topic to bring forward, because it's a taboo topic, there isn't a lot of resource out there. So this is kind of the cutting edge and pioneering of having the resources that are required for older adults in our residential care sector, and hopefully it'll grow from there. So thank you.